Time has a strange way of working on a person. Not always loudly, not always through a dramatic collapse, but subtly, incrementally, like water eroding stone. It doesn't need to shout, it doesn't need to strike, it just needs to wait. And for the man who runs from truth, who avoids responsibility, who chooses the path of delay and silence instead of confrontation and growth, time becomes his most merciless adversary. As the paradox, time which is supposed to heal only does so if you're moving forward. But if you're stuck, if you're hiding, time becomes a weapon turned inward. People often assume that doing nothing is neutral, that waiting, staying silent, or avoiding the problem is somehow safer than taking a risk, speaking the truth, or facing the consequences. But that's not how it works, not psychologically and certainly not philosophically. Inaction is not neutral. In fact, it's one of the most powerful decisions a person can make. Because when a man chooses to wait instead of act, he's not freezing time, he's amplifying it. He's giving his fear, his guilt, and his shame more room to grow, and those things, they don't stay still. They evolve. They become more complex, more toxic. And in the end, they begin to consume the very man who thought time was on his side. We see this all the time in relationships, in broken friendships, in betrayals. A man walks away thinking silence is strength. He refuses to apologize, refuses to confront his own failures. Maybe he tells himself, the storm will pass. But it doesn't, because the storm isn't outside him, it's inside. And every day he delays, that storm intensifies. Regret doesn't disappear over time, it sharpens. Conscience doesn't sleep, it waits. Time doesn't forget, it records. And eventually, he's left with something worse than failure. He's left with a hollow version of himself, one who knows deep down that he could have done better, that he should have acted, but didn't. That knowledge, that internal decay, is what time brings when we fail to confront it. And it breaks a man. Not all at once, slowly, quietly, deeply. This is why it's so important not to intervene. When someone refuses to take responsibility, when they choose avoidance over honesty, you don't need to punish them. You don't need to chase closure or force the truth. You let time do what time does best. Let him wait. Let him believe he's spared himself the pain, because he hasn't. He's only delayed it. And every second that ticks by, the pressure mounts. There's a cost to cowardice, and it's measured not in dramatic moments, but in prolonged suffering. Let time break him, because nothing else can do it more thoroughly, more precisely, or more justly. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply letting someone sit with the consequences they refuse to face. Guilt is a peculiar force. It doesn't scream for attention right away. In fact, it often arrives quietly, masked as irritation, restlessness, or the inability to sit still in your own skin. But over time, if left unresolved, guilt grows. It begins to infiltrate thought patterns, disrupt sleep, distort relationships, and the longer it's ignored, the deeper it roots itself in the psyche. That's the part most people don't understand. Guilt doesn't fade with time. It festers, it expands, it multiplies in complexity. And for the man who chooses not to act, who delays making amends, who avoids facing the damage he's caused, guilt becomes a slow psychological crucifixion. What starts as a single moment, a betrayal, a lie, a failure to speak when it mattered, doesn't stay confined to that moment. The mind doesn't just catalog these failures and forget them. No, it integrates them into the structure of who you are. You become the person who didn't apologize. You become the one who stayed silent. And that knowledge starts to haunt you. It turns ordinary reflection into self-condemnation. And it gets worse the longer it's avoided. Because the more time that passes, the harder it becomes to make it right. The guilt doesn't just remain, it compounds with every excuse, every rationalization, every missed opportunity to do the right thing. This is why waiting hurts. Not just because the other person may move on without you, but because you remain stuck in the emotional consequences of your own inaction. The longer you wait, the more guilt transforms from a momentary feeling into an enduring identity. And here's the truth. People can't carry unresolved guilt indefinitely. They either face it or they become something distorted by it. Numb, bitter, avoidant, angry. These are just forms of guilt in disguise. And those emotions, once internalized, begin to sabotage every new opportunity for growth, intimacy, and connection. That's the ironic part. The man who waits thinks he's preserving himself. He tells himself, I'll fix it later, it's not the right time. But he's not preserving anything. He's decaying internally, philosophically, spiritually. He's slowly being dismantled by the weight of what he refused to face, and eventually guilt doesn't just cause discomfort, it becomes a kind of internal rot. It eats at the foundations of one's integrity. Well, because to live with unacknowledged guilt is to lie to yourself every single day. And so the pain intensifies, not because someone is actively punishing him, but because in the waiting, he punishes himself through dreams, through the conversations he replays at night, through the empty silence that grows heavier with each passing day. This is the truth people need to hear. Guilt is not patient. It grows, it evolves, and the longer you avoid it, the more it hurts. If he refuses to face it, let him carry it. Because guilt, unchecked, always finds a way to break the man who won't confess. There's a dangerous illusion that many people fall into, the idea that avoidance is a form of control. That if they just stay quiet, if they don't acknowledge the damage they've done or the truth staring them in the face, they can somehow outlast the consequences. This is one of the most seductive lies we tell ourselves, that by doing nothing, we're protecting ourselves, that silence is safety. But it's not. Avoidance is not a fortress, it's a cage. And over time, it becomes a prison of your own making. When a man chooses to escape instead of confront, he doesn't disappear from the situation, he disappears from himself. And that has consequences, real psychological consequences, because the mind knows, the soul knows. You can suppress the truth temporarily, bury it under distractions, under work, under other people, but it doesn't go away. It waits. And while it waits, it gathers strength. You start to see it in the way he looks at himself in the mirror, in the way he withdraws from conversations that cut too close to the bone, in the way he avoids places, people, memories, anything that might trigger that fragile structure of denial. This illusion of escape is particularly destructive because it mimics the appearance of peace. On the outside, he may look composed, maybe even indifferent, but internally, the psychological tension is mounting. That's what happens when you split yourself in two, when your actions contradict your conscience. You can't maintain that split without consequence. Eventually, the weight of what's unspoken becomes unbearable. It leaks into your language, your habits, your relationships, and what began as a survival strategy becomes a form of self-sabotage. This is the part that's hard to accept, especially for someone who's trying to control the narrative by withdrawing. Avoidance doesn't preserve your dignity, it erodes it, slowly, invisibly, but with absolute precision. And the longer you maintain that illusion, the more disconnected you become from the very thing that could redeem you, the truth. Philosophically, this is about integrity. When you avoid what you know you should face, you begin to fracture your identity, and no one can live divided for long. Something has to give. And when it does, it's rarely a clean break. It's messy, it's painful, and it often comes too late to undo the damage. You see, the man who chooses escape over truth always believes he has more time, that he'll deal with it later. But there is no later. Not in any real, meaningful sense, because while he's pretending to outrun the problem is quietly reshaping who he is. And by the time he realizes it, the man he used to be, the one who still had the courage to act, is long gone. Escape is not freedom, it's just another form of bondage dressed in silence. Consequences are not static. They don't just sit there waiting for someone to finally show up and face them like a bill overdue. No, consequences evolve. They compound over time. That's a fundamental psychological and moral truth people often overlook. When someone thinks they're dodging a reckoning by delaying it, what they're really doing is inflating the cost of it. And the longer they wait, the heavier that burden becomes. There's this false notion that if you don't deal with the problem today, it'll be easier tomorrow. That somehow with enough distance, the consequences will shrink or maybe just dissolve on their own. But that's not how life works. Time doesn't reduce consequences, it amplifies them. What begins as a small fracture in a relationship, a small lie, a moment of neglect, grows. Like a crack in glass under pressure, it expands until eventually the entire structure shatters under its weight. It doesn't happen all at once. It builds quietly, incrementally, then catastrophically. This is true not just interpersonally, but internally. Psychologically speaking, unresolved issues don't remain small. They become patterns, habits, character. If someone repeatedly refuses to face what they've broken, they're not just avoiding responsibility, they're reinforcing a way of being, a framework of denial, blame, and passivity that eventually governs every part of their life. And soon, it's not just one broken relationship they're avoiding, it's truth itself. They become the kind of person who instinctively flees discomfort, who withholds, deflects, and collapses under any kind of moral weight. And again, this doesn't go unnoticed. People think they're getting away with it, that others have forgotten, that time has dulled the impact. But those consequences ripple outward, damaging trust, eroding credibility, closing doors that might have remained open. Even silence has a cost. In fact, silence often costs the most because it deceives everyone into thinking there's nothing left to say until it's too late. And here's the most tragic part. Those consequences, once multiplied over time, often end up far worse than if the person had just faced the music early on, apologized, told the truth, took the hit. Because yes, there is a cost to facing hard things, but it's always lower than the price of delay. The longer you wait, the more that weight shifts from something you carry to something that crushes you. So, when someone refuses to take responsibility, don't chase them. Don't try to lighten their load or make it easier for them. Let time do its work. Let it multiply what they ignored. Because they're not escaping pain, they're storing it up like debt. And interest is always accumulating. Eventually, the weight of delayed consequences doesn't just break circumstances, it breaks the person. One of the most powerful realizations in life comes when you realize that not everything needs to be fixed by your hand. We live in a world where people often feel the compulsion to correct every wrong, to right every injustice, to rush in and make things better. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back and allow time to carry out what you cannot. This is especially true when it comes to the consequences of someone's refusal to face their own actions. In the realm of relationships, conflict, and personal growth, it's not always about being the one to make it right. Sometimes it's about stepping aside and letting time deliver the message. There's an inherent strength in letting someone sit with the consequences of their decisions, particularly when they've chosen to delay taking responsibility. This idea runs counter to our instinct to solve problems immediately, to confront wrongdoers head on and demand restitution. But there's wisdom in understanding that when someone refuses to engage with the truth or take ownership of their actions, they are often doing so because they're not yet ready to deal with the consequences. They are running from something deeper than just the problem at hand. They are running from themselves, from their own inner turmoil, from their own guilt and shame. And if you step in too early, if you try to correct the imbalance too quickly, you may actually be robbing them of the necessary confrontation with themselves that could lead to growth. Let time do its work. The weight of unresolved guilt and the internal conflict of avoiding responsibility will eventually build up and demand acknowledgement. And when that moment comes, when they are finally confronted with the truth of what they've done or failed to do, the impact will be far greater than if you had swooped in to relieve them of the burden. There's a redemptive quality in suffering through the consequences of your own choices. It is this suffering, this struggle, that leads to transformation. Without it, there is no learning. Without it, there is no growth. Now, it's easy to see this as a form of passive revenge, but it's not about revenge at all. It's about justice. The natural course of things, the moral order, demands that the consequences of our actions catch up with us. And when we allow this process to unfold naturally, when we stop trying to intervene, we free ourselves from the role of punisher. We allow the person to face their own reckoning, to truly come to terms with the harm they've caused, and to hopefully make things right, not because we forced them to, but because they were finally ready to face the truth themselves. This is where the real power lies, the act of letting go, the ability to step back and trust that in the end, truth will catch up with them, that time will expose the cracks they've tried to conceal. It requires strength and patience, two virtues that are too often in short supply. But if you can embrace this approach, you will find that you not only spare yourself the burden of carrying someone else's responsibility, but you also give them the opportunity for genuine transformation. In the end, the greatest revenge is not in forcing someone to face the consequences of their actions. It's in allowing them to face them on their own terms, with time as the ultimate teacher. And when that moment comes, when they realize the full weight of what they've done, the lesson will be one they can never forget. Healing doesn't wait for anyone. This is a fundamental truth about the nature of life, about how time works in the real world. We often think of healing as a passive process, as something that happens when the conditions are just right, when the person who has wronged us finally admits their fault, or when circumstances align to give us closure. But that's not how it happens. Healing doesn't require the other person to change. Healing doesn't wait for an apology, nor does it depend on the actions of someone else. It's not a process that's at the mercy of someone else's timeline. Healing starts within you, and it starts the moment you choose to stop waiting for them. This is what's so crucial to understand about the philosophy of letting time break them. If you're waiting for someone to make things right, you're not really waiting for them at all. You're waiting for them to give you something that's actually yours to take. Closure, peace, growth. These things are internal processes. They begin when you stop depending on others to fix what they broke, when you stop hoping that somehow they'll come back and make it all better. The truth is, healing begins the moment you realize that you've already done the work you need to do to move forward, whether they do or not. The more we lean on others for our own healing, the more we trap ourselves in a cycle of emotional dependency. We condition ourselves to believe that our emotional well-being is subject to someone else's actions. This is a dangerous way to live. It creates a passive, helpless existence where we become at the mercy of another person's timeline, another person's decisions. The longer we wait for that external resolution, the longer we put off our own healing. And the longer we put it off, the more we poison ourselves with frustration, anger, and resentment. The antidote to this dependency is empowerment through self-ownership. You have the power to heal. You have the ability to choose what you take from your experiences and how you move forward. And the sooner you realize that waiting for someone to apologize or make amends is not a prerequisite for your peace, the sooner you can begin to free yourself from the emotional weight of that waiting. This doesn't mean you ignore the harm done or suppress your emotion. It means you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to feel whole again. You choose to stop living in a state of expectation and begin living in a state of personal agency. Letting go of this expectation is not an easy thing to do. It requires strength, courage, and a level of emotional maturity that many people find difficult to summon. But it's essential to your emotional freedom. You cannot keep waiting on someone else to fix what they broke, because you are the one left living with the aftermath. The longer you stay waiting, the more you lock yourself into a position where they continue to hold power over your emotional state. And that's not a life worth living. True healing comes when you stop waiting for them to act. It comes when you finally accept that you are the one who determines when you are ready to move on. You are the one who gets to decide when enough time has passed for you to begin the process of recovery. Don't wait for them. Heal for yourself. And in doing so, you will find that the true power was never in their apology. It was in your ability to free yourself from waiting.